the other night was their final straw. And I'm talking about, I saw some fans yesterday that were like, I watched her play in high school, and I cannot stomach this any longer. And they understand why she crashed out, but they don't want to watch her crash out. And look, it's understandable. I get that. I do get it. So Caitlin Clark fans have started attacking those fans. I mean, what are you doing?
Nobody was ready for what happened tonight. Not the executives sitting in their luxury suites, not the sponsors watching the broadcast numbers climb in real time, not the front offices that spent years convinced they controlled the narrative. Because while the scoreboard was flashing numbers that had never been seen before in the entire history of women's professional basketball, something far more significant was happening behind closed doors. And by the time the final whistle blew, the entire structure of the sport had shifted in a way that cannot be undone. 45 points, 10 assists, one player, one night, and an institution that may never recover from what it allowed to happen on its own floor. But to understand why tonight felt different, why this wasn't just another big performance from an already extraordinary talent, you have to go back further than the opening tip. You have to look at the months of decisions, the patterns of behavior, and the slow institutional rot that finally became impossible to ignore. Because what happened tonight wasn't a surprise to anyone who had been paying attention. It was the inevitable result of a system that kept poking a phenomenon and somehow expected the phenomenon to stay quiet. It didn't. There are performances that are impressive, and then there are performances that rewrite what people believe is possible. Tonight belonged to the second category. Caitlin Clark stepped onto that floor and proceeded to dismantle every single defensive scheme thrown at her with a level of precision and creativity that left broadcasters genuinely struggling to find the right words. 45 points, 10 assists, the first 40-point, 10-assist performance in the entire history of the WNBA. Not this season, not this decade, ever. In the complete history of the league, nobody had ever done what she did tonight. And she did it against a Seattle Storm squad that came into this game with genuine playoff ambitions and a young front court that had been turning heads all season. The shot that crystallized the entire evening came in the closing moments, a dribble pull-up fadeaway three that had no business going in under any normal definition of basketball physics. The defender had done everything right. The angle was wrong, the pressure was real, and she released it anyway. Watched it arc through the air, and it found nothing but net in a moment so audacious that even veteran commentators went silent for a half second before finding their voices. Steph Curry himself would have taken a bow after that one. Dominique Malanga did everything in her power to match the energy. 28 points, 14 rebounds, a 20-year-old playing with a physicality and poise that made it clear she will be a problem in this league for a very long time. Arfam, just 19 years old, added 16 points, 9 rebounds, 4 assists, and knocked down 4 three-pointers in the third quarter alone. That young front court is the real deal, and on any other night, in any other game, they would have been the headline. But this wasn't any other night. The Fever's defense was a disaster by any measurable standard. Seattle shot 57% from the floor, 38% from three. Simply, Indiana could not get stops when it mattered, and the game turned into a track meet that ultimately ended 107-105 in Indiana's favor. Not because the Fever defense showed up late, but because one player absolutely refused to let her team lose. Kelsey Mitchell was a factor too, playing her role with the kind of clutch efficiency that reminds people she belongs in the conversation when discussing this roster's legitimate weapons. Natisha Heidman added 16 and 8. Jade Melbourne chipped in 16 and 5. This was a wildly entertaining basketball game from start to finish. Two teams going at each other with real intensity. A young Storm squad showing flashes of something special, and a Fever superstar turning in the greatest individual performance in franchise history. And yet, the most important events of the evening had nothing to do with basketball. For anyone watching tonight with clear eyes, there was a pattern on the floor that went far beyond competitive defense.
Everybody remembers that game? They destroyed the Fever, but during the game, in Ben Daniels' watch party chat, I said in the chat, I was like, Jesus, this Portland Fire team is so much fun to watch. I was like, wow, this team's fun to watch. They were playing hard and they were playing fast, and the Fever couldn't keep up with them. They got run out of the building.
This has been building for months. Opposing defensive units have made it increasingly obvious that the strategy against Clark isn't just to guard her well, it's to make her pay a physical price for every single trip down the floor. Blindside hits that arrive after the whistle, jersey tugs that go uncalled in the open court, off-ball collisions that would draw immediate attention if they happen to almost anyone else on the floor. These aren't accidents. They're not just hard basketball. They are coordinated physical disruptions designed to chip away at her rhythm, test her mental resilience, and, if things go sideways, risk genuine injury to the most valuable player in the sport. And the officiating crews have been allowing it. That's the part that cannot be explained away with basketball logic. Standard fouls, the kind that get called in routine regular season games between teams nobody outside their own markets cares about, were being routinely swallowed or deliberately downgraded when they involved Clark. The inconsistency has been visible enough that it stopped being a debate among fans and started being an open acknowledgement among people who cover the sport professionally. Tonight, even during a 45-point historic masterclass, the pattern continued. Defenders used borderline extreme contact to try to disrupt her momentum. The floor officials stood by. The crowd saw it. The broadcast audience saw it. Everybody with functioning eyes saw it. And the officials looked directly at it and made a collective decision to let it go. What that communicates, whether it's intentional or a product of deeper institutional bias, is that the most important player in the sport does not receive the same baseline protection that other players take for granted. It signals that there is a ceiling on how seriously the administration takes her safety, and it raises a question that the front offices have been desperately trying to avoid answering publicly. If she gets seriously hurt because an unprotected collision lands wrong, who exactly is going to be held accountable? That question was about to get a very uncomfortable answer from a very unexpected source. Adam Silver didn't have to say anything. He's the NBA commissioner. The WNBA operates under a connected but separate umbrella. He could have stayed entirely in his lane, offered diplomatic non-answers if pressed, and let the WNBA's own leadership handle the fallout from months of officiating controversy. That would have been the safe institutional move, the politically clean option. He didn't take it. At the Game Plan Summit hosted by CNBC, Silver sat down for an on-stage conversation and said plainly and without diplomatic cushioning that the situation surrounding Caitlin Clark represents a failure. Not a challenge, not a learning opportunity, a failure. His exact framing was pointed and deliberate, acknowledging that the issues around Clark are not primarily about any single play or any single officiating call, but about the systemic inability of the league to handle the situation in real time, to see what was happening, process it correctly, and respond to it the way a competent administration should. He said that directly. He called it a failure, twice. Silver also made a point of establishing his personal relationship with Clark, noting that he knows her well, that she's an extraordinary player and an extraordinary person, and that the environment she's been operating in has been unfairly turned into a heavily politicized situation that serves nobody's actual interests. He didn't name specific individuals. He didn't have to. When the top executive in the broader basketball ecosystem publicly identifies the environment around your league's biggest star as toxic and mismanaged, the message lands regardless of how carefully it's worded. This wasn't a casual remark. This was a calculated intervention from someone who has spent decades reading corporate atmospheres and understanding exactly what public statements do to institutional credibility. Silver looked at the data, the viewership numbers, the sponsorship conversations, the fan sentiment trending in real time, and he made a decision to step on the record and say what millions of people watching from home had already concluded. The current leadership structure failed to protect the asset that has been carrying this league's economic growth on her back. And in saying so publicly, Silver effectively issued a vote of no confidence in the people responsible for making those decisions.
For the front offices, that is not a recoverable moment through normal PR channels. You cannot spin your way past the commissioner of basketball telling the world your environment is broken. Corporate statements matter, officiating patterns matter, executive interventions matter. But there's a data point that cuts through it all with brutal simplicity, and it showed up tonight in the words of someone who had done everything right as a fan. This person flew to Indianapolis, they brought their family, they attended the All-Star game in person, they bought multiple jerseys, not one, multiple. They traveled on the road to watch the Fever play away games, they spent thousands of dollars across 15 home games in 2024 and 2025 combined, investing not just financially, but emotionally in the idea that this team was building something worth believing in. In 2026, they haven't spent a single dollar. They canceled every app subscription except the two they would have had anyway. They described going from being one of the organization's biggest supporters to being deeply disappointed in a way they never anticipated. And their specific indictment wasn't vague fan frustration, it was precise. The coaching staff and the front office, in their view, have systematically stripped away everything that made this team must-watch basketball. They turned what should have been the most exciting era in franchise history into something that drives away the exact audience the league desperately needs to keep. That fan is not alone. In comment sections, in watch party chats, in online communities that have been tracking this situation closely, the sentiment is remarkably consistent. People who drove 4.5 hours to see road games are now deciding against the trip. People who booked 2-day travel packages are canceling them. People who were the loudest voices in rooms full of casual sports fans, the ones who converted their friends, their coworkers, their family members into Fever followers, are going quiet. That is the kind of fan erosion that doesn't show up immediately in the headline numbers, but absolutely devastates long-term brand health. The casual viewer you acquired because of the phenomenon will leave the moment the phenomenon is no longer the main story. But the passionate superfan who traveled, spent, and evangelized on the league's behalf, losing them is a different category of damage entirely. They don't just stop watching, they actively tell everyone in their orbit why they stopped. Sponsors understand this distinction. The league may not be acting like it does, but sponsors absolutely understand it. Let's come back to the floor for a moment because the basketball itself deserves honest analysis beyond just Clark's historic line. Seattle came into this game with a genuine identity. That young front court, Dominique Malonga at 20 years old and Arfam at just 19, was the story the Storm wanted everyone talking about. And honestly, they weren't wrong to feel confident about it. Malonga was dominant for long stretches of this game. 28 points, 14 rebounds, physical and skilled and composed in a way that players twice her age often aren't. She imposed herself on the game from the opening minutes and didn't back down even when the moment got bigger around her. Arfa matched that energy with a third quarter that will be replayed in highlight packages for years. 4 3-pointers in a single quarter, 16 points and 9 rebounds in a performance that announced loudly and without ambiguity that she belongs at this level. 2 teenagers, essentially, giving a legitimately historic individual performance everything it could handle. And yet, the Fever found a way to survive. Kelsey Mitchell was a factor. Natisha Heidman and Jade Melbourne both contributed double-digit scoring nights. Monweek Billings, who fouled out late, had done enough damage to matter before she was forced to the bench. The final score of 107-105 doesn't reflect how chaotic and competitive and genuinely entertaining this game was from opening to finish. Seattle shot 57% from the field. Indiana's defense was frankly not good enough for most of this game.
But Clark's individual performance was so extraordinary, so relentlessly efficient in the moments that mattered most, that the Fever didn't need a complete team tonight. They needed one player to be unguardable, and she was.
The Portland Fire, by the way, have been another team worth paying attention to lately. In recent matchups, they've shown a pace and aggression that gave the Fever genuine trouble, running them off the floor in a way that exposed some of the defensive and depth issues this roster has been carrying. The competition in this league is getting sharper. The margin for organizational dysfunction is getting thinner. That context matters for everything that's coming next. While the post-game chaos was still unfolding in real time, something else was happening entirely off the radar of the official broadcast. High-level sports marketing sources have leaked information that puts the current situation in a completely different frame. Representatives from the Women's Premier Basketball Association, the WPBA, the rival league that has been quietly building its infrastructure over the past several months, are reportedly constructing a framework specifically designed to make a serious run at Clark. Not a conversation, not an exploratory meeting, a framework, multi-million-dollar, structured to offer three things the current environment has spectacularly failed to provide: complete operational security, genuine creative and athletic control over her own brand, and a meaningful equity stake in the organization itself. This is where the business story becomes genuinely historic. The WPBA doesn't carry the institutional baggage that has made the current situation so combustible. There's no legacy officiating culture to reform. There's no old guard protecting its territory. There's no decade-old power structure full of people who privately resent what her arrival has meant for the balance of influence inside their organization. They are building from scratch, and they are building with the explicit understanding that whoever signs Clark doesn't just get a superstar, they get the entire economic engine of women's basketball for the foreseeable future. Major network sponsors, the ones who have been watching every officiating disaster and every administrative misfire with increasing alarm, are reportedly having very direct conversations about where their marketing budgets follow. The numbers are significant enough that multiple sources describe them as prepared to move their spend entirely based on where Clark lands. That's not leverage Clark's team is manufacturing. That's the organic market reality of what happens when one player drives that much viewership, that much merchandise, that much conversation, and that much cultural relevance simultaneously. The establishment spent years operating on the assumption that their platform gave them the power in this relationship. Tonight proved that assumption was always backwards. The platform is worth exactly what it's worth because of the people on it. Remove the phenomenon, and the platform is just an empty building with expensive lighting. The WPBA understands this. The question is whether the current league structure understands it before the window to act closes permanently. Here's where things stand tonight, stated plainly. The Fever organization and the broader WNBA administration have arrived at a moment that doesn't offer comfortable middle ground options. The historic performance happened. The commissioner's public rebuke happened. The fan revolt is accelerating in documented, quantifiable ways. The rival league is actively constructing a competitive offer. Sponsors are watching every single development with their budget conversations open in the background. The establishment tried the slow approach, minimize the milestones, hope the novelty fades, let the political noise exhaust the audience, use the officiating environment to chip away at her on-court dominance. None of it worked. The milestones kept coming. The novelty didn't fade, it intensified. And tonight, a 45-point franchise record with 10 assists made the entire strategy of attrition look not just ineffective, but genuinely absurd in retrospect.
The window for a corrective response is not permanently closed, but it is closing. What that response looks like is actually not complicated, even if executing it requires the kind of institutional honesty that bureaucracies almost always avoid until it's too late. The officiating guidelines need a complete overhaul, not a press release promising a review. The coaching philosophy needs to reflect the reality of what this team's identity actually is and should be, built around its most extraordinary asset, not operating in quiet tension with her. And the front office needs to make a clear, public, demonstrable commitment to the organizational direction that the fan base has been demanding for months. If those things happen with real urgency and real accountability, there is still a version of this story where the league emerges stronger than it entered this crisis. History has examples of institutions that faced these moments and chose correctly. They're the ones people point to as case studies in organizational resilience. The institutions that chose incorrectly, they become cautionary tales, studied in business schools, referenced in sports documentaries, used as the before picture in someone else's success story. The choice is on the table. The clock is running. Step back from the immediate drama for a moment. Step away from the officiating controversies, the executive statements, the rival league negotiations, and the fan sentiment trackers. Because underneath all of it is a question that the sports world doesn't fully know how to answer yet, and the answer is going to matter far beyond this league, this season, or this situation. What does it mean when a single individual becomes larger than the institution built to contain her? This isn't the first time sports history has produced a player whose commercial and cultural impact exposed the structural limitations of the league around them. It's happened in men's basketball. It's happened in tennis. It's happened in soccer. Every time it does, the institution faces a fundamental choice about whether it's willing to evolve fast enough to retain what it has, or whether its internal politics will cause it to lose the very thing that made it relevant to the broader public. The WNBA has been fighting for mainstream legitimacy for decades. Games were played in front of sparse crowds in arenas that felt too big for the audience inside them. Broadcasts were buried in scheduling slots that signaled low priority. The cultural conversation about women's basketball existed in its own contained universe, adjacent to but never quite intersecting with the mainstream sports world. And then one player walked through the door and changed the entire equation seemingly overnight, bringing the cameras, bringing the sponsors, bringing the casual fans who had never given the league a serious look before. That is not a small thing. That is the kind of generational inflection point that organizations spend decades hoping for and rarely receive. Most leagues would consider themselves lucky to get a single moment like that in their entire history. The question hanging over everything tonight is whether the people running this institution are capable of recognizing what they have, and whether they're capable of the institutional humility required to protect it. Because the lesson of tonight isn't just about Caitlin Clark. It's about what sports organizations consistently do when they find themselves in the presence of something too big for their existing framework to comfortably accommodate. Sometimes they rise to the moment, and sometimes they let it walk out the door. Which version of this story gets told next is still being decided, but the decision window is shorter than anyone in those executive offices wants to admit. And the rest of the sports world, the sponsors, the rival leagues, the broadcast partners, the traveling superfans who once couldn't imagine walking away, they're all watching to see which choice gets made. The crown moved tonight. Whether the establishment moves with it is the only question left that matters.